Welcome to Chuck's World of Infinite Mojo, brought to you by Holy Chuck Burgers. Our business is burgers.
Good morning, Katarina Witt. There's no such thing as bad boys, only boys with bad hair.
Sponsored by Maxwell's Clothiers, your bespoke tailor since 1961. And now, your host of Chuck's World of Infinite Mojo, Chuck Bastie. Welcome back, everyone. This is Chuck's World of Infinite Mojo.
That's me.
We wanted to thank our title sponsor, Holy Chuck Burgers, for providing us with everything we need. I am Cam LaRock, your producer. Chuck, what's going on today?
Oh, I just love that jam, man. I got to give you credit again for finding that music because, it's funny too, because I was watching a commercial on TV the other day and that jam came on and I just like, what's that jam? That's like my jam.
Yeah, you heard it somewhere before.
Yeah, I heard that somewhere. And I was like, that's my jam. And then I felt so like I didn't make that song. I didn't come up with that song. You found it. And I'm like, yeah, that's the one I'm going to choose. But I heard it on TV and I felt lost. I didn't know where it was. I'm like, that's my jam. And now it's on a commercial. So the Chuck's World of Infinite Mojo jam is now like across the stratosphere on TV now. So
might need to get that patented.
Yeah.
Trademark that shit.
I need to find the guy who actually created that jam too, because that's
no doubt. And the animation itself is great too. Every time I watch it, I notice a little detail I didn't see before. So great job to the guy who made it for us.
To Ahmed. Ahmed, my Egyptian counterpart in Egypt, who came up with that.
Did a great job.
Did an amazing job. Like way overachieved on what I thought that was going to come out with, and I'm so thankful for that as well. So now we want to get on to business because Chuck's World of Infinite Mojo, it's not always about the shits and giggles. We're going to be talking about mental health today with our good friend Steve Morris, and Steve Morris is one of my most cherished people. We had him on the show last time, and we were talking about the starting points of being able to cognitively catch your emotions, your feelings. And today we're going to talk about the foundation of living. So Steve has a structure for this, and I'm really looking forward to having Steve on the show.
Yeah, I want to hear from Steve as well, so I'll get out of here. Leave it to you guys.
All right. Thanks, Cam. And our guest, Stephen Morris, has now joined us on the show as well. Steve, welcome back.
Thanks, Chuck. Thanks for having me back again. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, I was just going to say to our viewers as well, if they don't know who you are, if you want to go back to our first show with Steve here, he explains a little bit about his background, who he is, what kind of work he's done as well. But in order to stay away from the time frame that we have, which is finite, that we can cover the topics that we want to cover today, I thought I'd defer that back to the first episode. So if you haven't seen this, feel free to go back and watch the first episode. These are going to be in sequential order, what we're going to try and put together so that way people can get a little bit more tools in their life to have a little bit more happiness. And today we're going to talk about foundation for living.
Yeah, absolutely. So whenever you're trying to make any kind of behavior change, it's really important that you start to build a solid foundation underneath you that kind of promotes the kind of changes that you're trying to make. I always remember somebody saying to me really early on in my own recovery journey, I was probably 2 or 3 months into sobriety and sitting down with people that were trying to help me through the early emotional chaos that I was in, saying to me, listen, your life, you're always going to achieve in your life what your lifestyle's got you set up to achieve. So one of the things that I try to do with people that I work with, and one of the things that I try to do with myself is set up a really good foundation for what's going to promote that behavior change that I'm looking for. And there's some fundamental pillars that we're going to get into in the conversation today that revolve around support network and structure and schedule, as well as diet and exercise and things like that. But basically what we're trying to do is create this way of living that allows you to deal with these emotional reactions when they come up for you, that allows you to start to build awareness and start to put some of the skills in place to deal with things so that you can cope with that emotional overwhelm before you start getting into some of the other stuff that's underneath the surface. Because if you jump straight into the emotional stuff that's attached to all the different schemas and modes that we talked about in the last conversation, without having this foundation underneath you, things can get pretty ugly really quickly and the wheels can come off. So it's important to get this foundation sorted out before you do anything.
Yeah, and one of the things I think I'd like to start with that I didn't get a chance to ask you in the first episode is really your core belief system, your values that you have as a human being that you've learned. These are all inherently learned that you pick up along the way. I mean, an unmet expectation on my side is going to come from a belief of how I think it should have gone. You know, how I think that person should have been kinder or nicer, or what they should
Right.
have said, or what they could have said differently as well. And that comes from my value system, my belief system, my education, my upbringing, my manners, all these things as well. And obviously, there's 8 billion people in the world that have 8 billion different learning styles and, you know, different upbringings and educations. And I always like to think that if there is a God up there that you could quantify and he's looking down on us as a deity, if he's just not up there just laughing his ass off. Yeah, you know, there it is. Hey, like, hey, Jimmy, come over here and have a look at this one. This one's going to get
Yeah.
pretty excited right now. And it's
Yeah.
like he's got an ongoing YouTube channel of just watching personalities like connect, disconnect, fight, you know, laugh, all the dynamics that we have that are starting from our values and belief systems.
Yeah, 100%. So values and beliefs kind of underpin absolutely everything we do. It's one of the, when I start working with people in a one-on-one capacity, once we start to build awareness for what's happening in the personality. So, you know, what are your schemas? What are your modes? What are the things that are going on? The next thing that we take is your values and your beliefs, because if you're living a life that is lined up with your own particular values and beliefs, then you're living a life that has meaning, because you're taking on things that have meaning, which means you're giving your life direction. And one of the biggest things that comes up for people, particularly those that I'm working with who are dealing with addictive and compulsive coping mechanisms, is that I feel like my life has no meaning. That's 9 times out of 10 because the addictive lifestyle that people have been living, the lifestyle that's got a lot of chaos and rigidity around the different things that are happening inside of our world, is completely contrary to the values and belief system that's inside of all of us. So we start off basically by looking at what values you have kind of innately in your system. I don't think that it's exactly like right across the board. There's a number of different schools of thoughts on this, but I tend to find that most people have a very similar set of values that remain the same the entire time, right the way through life. And what changes is your belief structure that goes inside of those values. And predominantly, these values seem to revolve around things like safety, honesty, respect, loyalty, and integrity. So I kind of start the conversation from an understanding that those 5 core values seem to be present in almost everybody. And there's some of the values that kind of go underneath them as underneath the umbrella of each one. But then your belief structure that kind of shows you how you're going to live those values out in your life is really dependent on what you were taught when you were a kid, what your cultural background is, where you were raised, the things that you were told, like from country to country. Your beliefs can change like constantly all the time, and your beliefs are fluid throughout the entire period of time that you're on this planet. So, you know, what I believe right now that's going to manifest from my values might be different tomorrow based on some new information that comes my way.
Yeah. I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about your values and your belief system, because obviously they're learned.
Yeah.
You know, and it's taken me a long time to unlearn a lot of the things that just didn't work for me, but I just didn't know any other way because it was what I knew.
Exactly.
And then when I got to the point where I was thinking to myself, my brain thinks the unknown is scary.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't know that, it almost seems like it's an impenetrable wall.
Right.
And I couldn't get beyond that way. Giving an example, when I was reading the 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, one of the 4 agreements is not take things personally. Something I really struggle with. I still struggle with, like day-to-day basis. It is as a highly sensitive person, you know, that's something that really is a trigger for me. I listened to this tape. It was a cassette tape, so I'm dating myself. I started driving from Toronto to LA. I did it in 2 days. I slept 6 hours in 2 days. And the whole way there, I listened to this tape. So call it 40 hours. And at the end of LA, I'm so thick-headed, I still didn't understand how not to take it personally. I knew I shouldn't, but I didn't understand how. Now, when I started doing the cognitive work as well, and I went back and listened to it again, I laughed at myself because I was just like, he says so many times how not to take these things personally, but I couldn't unlearn what I was stuck in that moment of
Exactly.
letting go of what I knew, which didn't work. And I had a big laugh about it as well. So unlearning that to me was a huge point. How do you work through these things that we all have inherent behaviors that we know we can't let go of, or that we should let go of, but knowing makes no difference. We still cling to them like they're our firstborn. So our values and our belief systems, like, just talk a little bit about how powerful they are, and
Yeah.
then being able to release that as well.
Yeah, there's so many ways that this manifests for people in their behavior patterns every single day. Just recognizing that beliefs are things that that really come from, you know, those childhood experiences that we talked about in the last conversation, that formulate these stories that we've got, and then your beliefs are sitting inside of those stories. And 9 times out of 10, the beliefs that we've got that are attached to particular emotional responses are very different to the beliefs that we've got when we're not in those emotional states. So what we're trying to do when we're trying to build an understanding of what your core fundamental values and beliefs are, is we start looking at 10 different domains inside of your life that might be important to you. And we kind of grade where you are in your life right now, and which ones of these domains are more important for you. So they start with things like intimate relationships and partnerships. They start with family relationships, friends. They start with parenting. They get into, we talk about spirituality, whether that's important to you, your physical health and well-being, your work and school and vocational aspect of things. And we start to grade in your life what in your life is important. Then inside of those particular areas, we want to ask you, how do these particular values manifest for you? So let's just say we're talking about intimate partnerships with your partner. And we're asking ourselves, like, how does honesty come out for you in that particular domain? Because we're looking at those 5 that I mentioned before. So if honesty is something that I value in my intimate relationships, how do I be honest? What does it look like when I'm being honest? And this is what will formulate what your core beliefs are inside of your life when you're in a healthy emotional state. So if I value honesty in a relationship, and I value integrity in a relationship, if I value respect in the relationship, what does it look like for me to be honest? What does it look like for me to be respectful? And what does it look like for me to have integrity? Right? So once I start to figure out what those things are, I'm really starting to get to grips with what my core values and beliefs are. Now this will highlight when those negative core beliefs are getting activated, because there's a different schema in my system that a part of my personality is reacting to.
Now, how could we walk through that for people that are watching this right now in our audience? Can you give us an example of how you would walk through people, so that way parents can actually do this work for themselves or see it for their kids, and just be able to get an indication of how that looks?
Yeah, it really is quite basic when you're trying to just walk through it with somebody. It revolves around understanding what those 5 values are. So honesty, respect, safety, integrity, and loyalty. And then just finding, if you on my website, there's a list of the 10 domains when we start talking about values and beliefs. So taking those 10 domains and just asking yourself, if I was being like, is honesty, is integrity, is respect, is loyalty, which ones of these particular values are really important for me in this domain? And what does it look like for me to be that way? So, most people, when they are going through these kind of exercises, when they're in a safe and calm place, it's very easy for them to articulate, well, if I'm being honest in my relationship with my parents, for example. So let's say we're talking about family. If I'm being honest in my relationship with my parents, this is what it looks like. If I'm having integrity in my relationship with my parents, this is what it looks like. So it really comes down to just having those conversations and having the ability to create that safe space where you can have those conversations, so that people feel free to talk about what those values would look like in their behavioral patterns, because that gives you an idea of what the beliefs are.
Yeah, I think that would be such a fantastic exercise as well. I know, sitting down with my daughter as well when she was a young girl, being able to say, hey, asking her for feedback, what makes you feel safe, what makes you feel loved, which makes you, like, understanding her love languages, what she was able to convey to me, even as a young girl. She would come up with I like it when you touch my nose like this before I go to bed, or you read to me, or you do anything like this, and it sets up a safe environment as well.
Exactly.
And then it just created the ability to say, hey, listen, there's nothing that you're ever going to say to daddy that's ever going to be, it's going to anger me. I mean, I don't always agree with you, and there's a big difference, but at the same time, it created an ability to have dialogue back and forth, where she could come to me and say anything. Whereas I just never had that with my parents. My dad was in the army, like he saw things completely differently that way.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, I was an ADHD AF kid that just was scheming to do anything. So like I was always going to anger and upset him as well. And going to this new point, I was a really good boundary wrecker.
Yeah.
I found amazing ways to ruin boundaries or to overstep boundaries or push the line to figure where that line was. And inherently as a young kid, I always did that as well. So I thought we talk a little bit about boundaries as well.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a great way to go into boundaries, because a lot of people don't realize that your boundaries revolve around what your values and your beliefs are. Right. So people think boundaries are revolving around lots of different things, but fundamentally what it comes down to is what do I value in this situation, and what are my beliefs about what's going on? So if I value honesty, respect, safety, loyalty, and integrity inside of this particular situation, inside of this friendship with you, and I'm going to set my boundaries around me being that way. So we have our own internal personal boundaries, and then we have external boundaries that we have with other people, in that I'm going to behave this way. So if I value respect, I'm going to respect myself and I'm going to respect you. And my boundary is set around you respecting me and respecting yourself. So they go both ways. So really understanding what those values are and what your beliefs are in those situations kind of shapes the way, well, not kind of, it literally shapes the way that you're going to set boundaries with people. And boundaries are so key when we start talking about relationships, family relationships, intimate relationships, friendship, because for a lot of people who've lived any kind of addictive lifestyle, or have got some pretty extreme coping mechanisms for what's going on underneath the surface, those parts of their personality that are kicking in, relationships become very challenging, and boundaries get walked all over left, right, and center. Now, boundaries is a fundamental unmet childhood need. So we talked in the first conversation about the 5 different areas of unmet childhood needs, and boundaries is one of those areas. So if boundaries weren't modeled to you in a healthy way, if you weren't allowed to set boundaries with others, and you weren't taught how to respect boundaries of other people, and you weren't raised in an environment where your values and beliefs were fundamentally respected, then you don't develop the ability to do that. And most people in those kind of situations have a very black and white on-off way of dealing with boundaries, in that I'm going to slime you with every single piece of information that I possibly can, or I'm not telling you anything. And it's kind of this like on-off kind of way of dealing with relationships.
Yeah. And I'll go back to my own example of like how I was inherently really bad at, or actually really good at not, honoring people's boundaries, for a variety of different reasons as well. And to begin with, I just didn't have any boundaries in my own real life. Yeah. So I didn't have boundaries in my own real life where I wouldn't just let myself down, which I did dozens of times a day. And I wouldn't stick to what was good for my soul or what was good for my mental health or my well-being. And I just did destructive behavioral patterns. That's a really bad boundary recognition for myself. And how could I, if I wasn't doing it with myself, how could I possibly be expected to deal with school on a day like today? You know what I mean? Like that's exactly what it is. So how do you be able to regulate that with boundaries? And starting with yourself first.
Yes. I mean, boundaries are all about yourself, right? They're not, yes, they are about trying to respect your own values and beliefs in terms of how they're being lived by for other people, but they come down to your own set of rules, if you like, that go inside of those values and beliefs. And regulating yourself revolves around really understanding the purpose that values and beliefs serve in your system. Not only do they serve the system, the purpose of this is how I'm going to live my life, this is the way that I'm going to set my boundaries with people, but they also serve the primary purpose in your system of activating guilt and shame. So when you look at all your emotions in your system, whether it's sadness, anger, fear, loneliness, but guilt and shame in particular, what we're talking about right now, every single emotion that you experience serves a purpose. It's got a reason. It's there for very specific ideas to come into your system. And what guilt and shame do is they draw attention to the fact that you're not living according to your values. So if you're not living according to your values and your beliefs, your system sits in this perpetual state of guilt and shame. And then there's the chaos within trying to escape from that.
Yeah, I want to go with guilt and shame for me as well. I read a book that literally hurt my brain about 10 years ago. It was Richard R. Dawkins, I think his name was, and he had a spectrum where he had quantified human emotions on a energetic level. And guilt and shame and humiliation were the bottom three that were the absolute lowest resonation of those energetic vibes. I want to say that those are what he called, and you'd probably be able to speak to this better, obviously, as the pattern of addiction is guilt, shame, and humiliation.
100%.
And where they sit inside of that. And I know that you say that they serve a purpose. I didn't understand that back then. Now I can see it's an indicator of where my emotional state sits inside of my, if I feel guilty about something, chances are pretty strong that I've done something against my core agreement of boundaries or belief systems or whatever that goes in contrary to that as well. I'm almost going to ask you right now about what it is when you sit in guilt, shame, and humiliation, because I think it's a good indicator of finding out where you are emotionally so you can regulate, get out of that, but not sit into it. So I wanted you to speak to that.
Yeah, first of all, before you get into anything like that, you have to differentiate between what guilt and shame are.
Gotcha.
Because a lot of people really struggle with understanding the concept of these two and what the difference is between them. So start with guilt. Guilt is an emotion that we experience when we've participated in an action where we've either done something or haven't done something that compromises our values and beliefs. So if I value honesty and I walk into a store, put something in my pocket and walk out, I am automatically going to feel guilty because I've compromised my value system. Guilt is there for the explicit purpose of saying to you, you are compromising your values right now, change the behavior and be accountable. So when we start looking at guilt, it's really important to ask the question. Quite often people will say to me, I feel guilty. And the first question I ask them is, what's the action that you've taken that's compromised a value? Because 9 times out of 10, that's not present. This is where people experience a lot of emotional confusion when it comes to these two emotions. The difference between guilt and shame is that shame is where you are, it's an internal process about who you are as a person to behave the way that you are in these specific situations that's compromising your values and your beliefs. So if I take something from a store, I'm automatically going to feel guilty. My internal critic will then let me know what a loser, an idiot, how stupid I am for doing these things. And that's what activates shame. So it's important to recognize quite often when you ask people, what is it that you've done that's compromised your values? What's the action that you've taken that's compromised your values? They can't come up with one. So I asked them, so what is it that's going on in your system? Well, I'm such an idiot and I'm so stupid for doing those things. I can't believe I made that mistake again. Okay, that's shame. Right? So differentiating between the two is really important.
Yeah, and I want to press you on the shame just because I have a question about this as well. And I think one of the things I think that if I'm humiliated or I'm guilty of something, it's a feeling obviously goes against my belief system. I was thinking shame was like where my internal critic says, you deserve this.
Yep.
I feel shameful because if I was humiliated that someone yelled at me in school, then I was just humiliated, or I felt guilty that I did something. Shame, take it to a whole nother level. Like I was humiliated by somebody and you deserved it.
Yeah.
Which made me feel shamed. Is there a difference there?
Yeah. So what you're talking about there is the difference between shame and toxic shame.
Okay.
So both guilt and shame, they serve a purpose in your system, like I said, right? So if you are doing something that's compromised a value, guilt is letting you know to stop doing that. We're meant to actually embrace that emotion, and because it's, I don't like the way that makes me feel,
And pivot.
I'm going to stop doing it.
Yeah.
Right? basically removes the guilt. Shame is there to say, I'm behaving in a certain way that's not how I want to behave. I'm not being the person I want to be. Okay, I need to stop doing that. We want to embrace it, stop doing it, and then you won't feel that way. The problem is that, as I said in the last conversation, and your internal critic is an internalized version of something that you heard when you were a kid, or like a child's interpretation of something that you heard when you were a kid. Mm-hmm. And we just internalize this. And if you think about the things that we hear when we're children, right across the board, shame is often used as a parenting tactic to change behavior. Yeah. So in certain circumstances, I learned this really difficult in a difficult situation when I've heard people say in certain circumstances, like, what'd you do that for? What's wrong with you? You should be ashamed of yourself, when they're talking to a child. Yeah. Right. So if that message gets continually passed on to the child, it then gets internalized with the intention, that internal critic that gets created in your system has the intention to motivate you not to do something. But the actual impact of that language activates toxic shame in your system, and it's very difficult to get away from. So it's based on the language that we've internalized from a young age. So if shame is meant to be there, right, then we just adjust the behavior. The problem is if you've got an internal critic that's activating toxic shame, when you adjust the behavior, it still keeps telling you that you deserve that. You're an idiot. You're stupid. You're a loser. You shouldn't do those things. What the hell's wrong with you? Put your face straight. And all you're doing is you're just creating this level of toxic shame in the system.
Yeah, I find that extremely hard to get out of it. I mean, obviously, when you're going into toxic shame, there's a whole layer of onions inside of that conversation as well, which would make sense why it sits in the pattern of addiction as well. So what would be things to get away from that?
Yeah. So and this is where we come down to the foundation, right? Because without a foundation for recovery, as you said, shame, guilt, humiliation, I also throw sadness and loneliness into that particular box, if you like. They're the foundation for addictive lifestyles. So when we start doing the work, when we start stepping into recovery, what we're doing is we're basically taking away. So if we understand what addiction is a coping mechanism. That's all it is. So I use a substance as the solution to my problem. The problem underneath the surface is that I can't handle that I feel guilty, I feel ashamed. So I use a substance to stop me feeling guilty and ashamed, which then when I sober up, I feel guilty and ashamed again. So I use the substance to try to cope with the guilt and shame, which then when I sober up, I feel guilty and ashamed again. And this is the cycle of addiction that happens. So when we're starting to make behavior changes in anything, whether we're talking about addictive lifestyles or even just, trying to change any kind of behavior, we want to build a foundation that allows us to have coping mechanisms, healthy coping mechanisms, when those emotions get activated. Because if you remove the substance or the process that you're using as a coping mechanism, but don't create that foundation, as soon as those things come up, you're just going to be activated and you're going to spiral out of control, trying to find this extreme way of coping with things. So putting a foundation in place is probably one of the most fundamental things that we have to do. And that starts with a really solid support network of people that you are reaching out to on a regular basis, having conversations and clearly communicating exactly what it is that you're looking for.
I want to go into one of the things that I think needs to be talked about inside of this dynamic is fear. So there's a lot of behaviors that become activated by fear, either as a motivator, as a coping mechanism. I always have the saying that fear stands for false evidence appearing real.
Yeah.
Just like I said in the first episode, our eyes are projectors. We see something and immediately our brain processes that. What does that mean? What's the threat? What's the control issue? How is that going to affect me? Whether it be like saving your life, like don't go down that back alley, which is a constructive fear, or projecting that fear upon somebody else in an unnecessary or unhealthy boundary eclipsing way.
Right.
So, I mean, like fear to me is like, I have a real issue with fear. It's my one thing that I just, if it comes from anxiety, I've done a lot of work just to make sure that I don't try and sit in a fear generated space. But I thought maybe you could speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah. So one of the things that I say to pretty much everybody, if you come to some of the groups that I do, the meetings that I facilitate online each week, we're often talking about fear because, in my opinion, the vast majority of people who struggle with any kind of behavior change, even if it's like I'm trying to implement a new healthy lifestyle of exercise and diet, right? When you're not dealing with these addictive or compulsive coping mechanisms, you're just trying to change behavior. As soon as we start to put those things in place, our system goes into what I call a fear-based state. So the vast majority of people who deal with substance issues, who deal with coping mechanisms that are extreme, obsessive or compulsive behavior patterns are existing inside of this fear-based state, meaning that fear is the predominant emotion that's in their system. So I'm afraid of, and people think that they're afraid of the thing that's happening out there. But generally what I find in the conversations that I have and the work that I've done with myself is I'm not afraid of the thing that's happening out there. I'm afraid of the emotion that's going to come up inside of me because of the thing that's happening out there. So if I'm going into a social circumstance, let's say, and I've got a fear that when I go into that social circumstance, somebody's going to ask me a question that's going to activate shame in my system.
Yeah.
I'm afraid of the shame that I will experience. So I'm going to avoid that circumstance in whatever way I can. So just learning that fundamentally underneath the surface, it's fear of emotion that most people sit in.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I can think right now that you say that, where I can see that in my own life, and honestly, like where I actually sit in a fear generated emotion or decision making, fear generated, as opposed to like, oh, okay, well, let's just sit in this first and figure out what my belief is on this. Because I mean, for me, I think I'm very, very impulsive, and I've always been very impulsive. So it's very easy for me just to sit in something and then go boom, knee jerk, and just react. It's taken me a long time to really sit with something that somebody says, process it, respond back without either trying to like dominate the conversation or fix it or interject or, God forbid, interrupt, because I interrupted people my entire life. Maybe that's more the ADHD part of my brain that just has to get in there.
ADHD is a fear response too, though, Chuck, in my opinion.
Okay, go with that one, because I mean that's a great topic.
Yeah. So a lot of people who okay, so this means talking a little bit about the fight or flight system. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's actually really important to understand the fight or flight system when you're trying to work with these kind of things, particularly when you're trying to work with a fear-based state. So when fear kicks in, your system, and you go outside of that window of tolerance that we talked about in the first conversation, your system will go into a state of fight or flight. It's like a primal response to what's happening in the environment, the fear that's in your system. And you basically go into 5 different reactions. Okay. The first is fight or overcompensation. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to fight your way out of things. Predominantly it does, but you can be overcompensatory in the way of humor. So trying to be overly funny all the time, just you're overcompensating in the environment, trying to cope with the fear that's in your system. The second way is flight. So I'm going to run away. I'm going to hide. I'm not going to go to work. I'm going to avoid that conversation. I'm not going to school. I'm going to stay in bed all day because I don't want to go outside. That's that flight response for the fear that's in your system. Now, as children, so those 2, fight or flight, are the primary responses that most people will turn to. They are the first thing that we go to. So I'm either going to fight my way out of this or I'm going to run away from it. As children, though, those 2 are not often available, because I can't fight my way out of this because I'm too small, and I can't run away because I'm too weak. So, I can't take care of myself. So if those 2 are not available, then we fall into the other 3. The first of those 3 is to freeze. So I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to just sit here and hope that everything passes me by. I'm not going to make a decision. I'm just going to completely just kind of like a deer in the headlights, kind of staring at everything. Okay. The second one is to submit, which is I'm going to give in to whatever the external narrative or internal narrative is. So if I'm being told something that's activating fear in my system by somebody outside, I'm going to submit to what it is that they're asking me to do in order to try to cope with the fear. Or I'm going to submit to my internal narrative that's telling me you're a loser and you have to stay in bed all day. And then I kind of submit to that and go into avoidance. The fifth one, inside of that is distract. So if you think about it in a child's environment, if things are fearful, so my needs are not being met, I'm not able to to express myself. I don't feel like I belong. There's arguing. There's all sorts of stuff going on in the environment. So the environment is no longer safe, whether that's real or just a child's perception. Now there's fear in their system. Well, I can't fight my way out of this because I'm too little, and I can't run away because I'm too weak. So I'm just going to distract the crap out of myself so that I don't have to face the fear in my system. So now as an adult, I've learned this behavior as coping with fear when it comes up for me. I don't want to face the fear, so I just distract. So people who exist in this fear-based state get diagnosed with ADHD. And it's a physiological response, which there are a number, which I'd love to talk about, a number of different physiological responses that come up as a result of being in that fight or flight state.
Now, you just said so much there that I just like, wow, like I'm sitting with right now. I'm trying to process now as far as carrying the conversation forward. Obviously, even on the ADHD side, we'll come back to that one as well, because obviously that's a point into itself as well. How do you sit inside fear when your nervous system goes into fight or flight? Immediately you have amygdala hijack, boom, you're into that fear state mode. I'm not reasonable in that mode, nor am I approachable in that mode. You can't come up to me. It's like sneaking up to me if I'm sleeping and then waking me up. It's that's how my body is geared right away for fear. So I guess my question is, how do I sit inside of fear and then catch that, or be able to identify the emotion or the feeling that I'm in it to change it in the first place?
Yeah, I'll speak about it in terms of what Marsha Linehan taught me. So Marsha Linehan she didn't teach me personally, but through her teachings, she's the creator of dialectical behavior therapy. So in DBT, when we start talking about working with any emotion, but particularly fear, we want to practice. And when you think you've practiced enough, practice some more. Basically what I'm talking about there is we have to practice things like mindfulness. We have to practice things like distress tolerance. We have to practice things like emotion regulation skills over and over and over again, because when your system goes into a fear-based state, you go to automatic coping mechanisms, because one of the physiological responses that happens in your system when it goes into that state of fear is that it shuts down your prefrontal cortex. So when your prefrontal cortex isn't working, because you don't need to think things through rationally and logically, this is the part of your brain that's responsible for executive function. So, impulse control, emotion regulation, urge control, trying to be able to think things through rationally and logically, questioning, Socratic questioning or critical thinking in your thought process, right? So that part of your brain's not working. So you go into an automatic primal response that is strongly related to your childhood behavior. So whatever you learned to do when you were a child, you're going to do when you go into this state of fight or flight. This is why people respond in aggression and anger, or they start, they just run away and hide and stay in bed all day, or whatever that primal response is what you'll go to. So from a therapy perspective or a therapeutic perspective, we have to practice. And when you think you've practiced enough, practice some more, the different skills that are going to work for you, so that they start to become habit. If they don't start to become habit, you are always going to go back into those old ways of coping every single time you get activated like that. So that's why therapy is such hard work, because you have to start practicing these things.
I think therapy is the easy part. It's practicing the therapy. That's the hard part. Anybody can go to therapy. You can just sit there and oh yeah, this is great. Really learning some good stuff here. This is amazing. I love what you've done with the place, right? But getting out of that door, that's when the work, that's hard, the work out there. You said something that I wanted to ask you about as well on the fear-based side. Obviously, in the pandemic, there was a absolute shit show of fear out there. I mean, information now has just never been more readily available on the internet. And I think we're just getting to the part right now where we're pioneering in how information is quantified or shared or liked, or what the metrics are, because there's so much of it out there. How do you make it worthy of being out there as news or as viable, therapy, or versus just, somebody's opinion on that it is, and how do they do that? Inside of that, when they shut the world down in the pandemic, a second pandemic was almost inevitable with mental health, because now you're going to see people's regular coping mechanisms. You and I had this conversation about, if addicts were taking away their addiction or their compulsion or their knee-jerk go-to, watch shit go crazy.
Yeah.
Then you go to sober people, and have this conversation about, okay, so the world's been now shut down, take away their job, take away their finances, take away their gyms, take away their church, take away all their coping mechanisms that we have never acknowledged as coping mechanisms. They've just been our rights and freedoms,
Right.
that we can hide behind as well. And then the fear just started to fester. And and 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, 8 becomes 16, and then it became compounded, where we were dealing with this fear-based system, and like you said, in the prefrontal cortex, limbic system of the executive function of the brain, then you just go into like 8-year-old reaction mode, and then watch all the trolls come out online, and all this, and just the anger and the vitriol, and families still probably haven't recovered from the effects of what was spewed during the pandemic as well. So I just thought we'd kind of speak to that as well.
Yeah, and it really does come down to, again, building foundation. Like, that structure and schedule to life was completely taken away when we went into the pandemic. And you're absolutely right on the money when you say that underneath that pandemic of COVID, there's a definitely another pandemic of mental health and addiction that we're going to be dealing with for quite a while, because for years we told people when we're dealing with mental health, whether we're talking about depression, anxiety, whether we're talking about substance use issues or process addictions or anything like that, we told people to build community, to have people that you're talking to all the time, have a structured lifestyle where you're going out and connecting with people on a regular basis, where you're going to work or going to school or going to programming or things like that, to keep yourself in a routine of doing things, setting aside time where you can practice these things in a healthy way. Also, exercising out and in the community and connecting with people. And then all of a sudden we just said, no, stop doing that and stay at home. So what that does is it just compounds those issues that we've got, those, like you say, those healthy coping mechanisms that we've got, pushes them down into a box. And now we've developed this system that's basically full of fear and anxiety about coming back out into the community and the way that we're going to have to behave. One of the things that I've noticed quite a bit is since that structure, that schedule, that kind of routine has been taken away from people, it's almost like there's a lot of filters that have been removed for the way people behave in the community now that they're coming back out. There's a lot of, like you say, they've taken that, because they've been interacting behind the screen for such a long time. They've taken that behavior and brought it out into the community, like reacting in the same way, forgetting that screen isn't there.
It works so well.
Yeah, it doesn't work so well when there's no screen there in front of you, keeping you safe from what it is that you're saying, right? But the vast majority of that comes from fear, right? It's really, I'm sitting in this fear-based state, and this is my coping mechanism for it.
Yeah, and I think like the fallout from that fear-based, I'll give you an example. So there's people that I align with on almost everything where I stand politically, emotionally, humanities, all these things we align with. Then COVID came in. Some of them were nurses. My dad served in the Army. Both my grandfathers served. I'm the only generation of our family that's never served. But we come from that, obviously, that upbringing. And my dad always used to say to me, he's like, Chuck, we don't serve to increase our way of life. We serve so people have a choice to choose the way of life that works for them. That's what freedom is. And I always grew up with that. And then as you got your freedoms taken away, and then the fear base came out there from COVID, and then the disinformation, and that just fueled people's anxiety and paranoia and all these things. I lost people that were nurses on my Facebook that blocked me, that we agreed on almost everything together, because I was sticking up for people's right to choose. And they're just like, yeah, but we could die. I'm like, yeah, and nobody said freedom was free. But I live in a world where I value freedom and people's choice of freedom and how that works for them. We all have laws. All the laws refer to all of us exactly the same way, whether you're black, yellow, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, purple, whatever. Everybody can consistently sit with that. And then I think the fear takes inside of that. And where I'm going with this is that they were not able to have logical conversations about this.
Right.
Whereas I would be sitting there saying, hey, well, this is just a conversation. And then behind the keyboard, they were screaming at me going, no, you're this, you're that, and all the name calling that came out with it and all the vitriol that came out with it. And it still hasn't been repaired. There's still lots of people that I've had that experience with that have just, gone away as well. How do you deal with people, that are not reasonable or are not able to get to that place of reason inside of that fear-based mentality?
Yeah, I mean, the thing to understand about that is that people are when they're in that state, when they're having those conversations, is that they're in a state of fight or flight, and trying to be rational or logical with somebody when they're in a state of fight or flight is pretty much impossible, because that part of their brain that's responsible for that just isn't working. So, one of the ways that I was always taught to do this, and I never really understood why until I got deeper into my schooling and training. But I always remember when I worked in residential treatment many years ago, we used to work Saturdays, and it was always sports day. So you're talking about like 30 guys in a residential treatment facility. They're locked down in this space for 6 months together. The only people that they see. So tensions get a little bit high, right? And inside of those circumstances, 9 times out of 10 on a weekend, there'd be some kind of altercation that would happen on the field during sports day. So my responsibility in that moment was to separate the people and basically go through a process of validating their experience. So anybody that is in a state of fight or flight is responding to a fear that's in their system. So, just give you an example. I remember one guy saying that this guy had called him a loser on the pitch. Right. So they were playing football, soccer, and one of them got into a pushing match. So separated them, pulled them apart. And he said, I got him inside and I said, so what's going on? And he said, that guy called me a loser. And I'm like, okay, so tell me about that. Like, I understand why you're angry. Tell me a little bit about that. So I just started validating him. And we were always taught that if you want to disengage somebody's objection to having a rational, logical conversation, it takes validation of their experience to bring down the emotional reaction. The more that you push back against it, the less that person is going to be rational to the conversation.
And the more you'll stick to that as well.
Exactly,
double down.
right? So validate. And then sooner or later, you see that emotion start to come down and they start to become rational. Or even me in those kind of situations, when somebody validates me, if I'm in a state of anger, I start to become a lot more rational and logical in the conversation.
I'm being silly right now.
Yeah. Right. So, but the only way to work with that is in my opinion, is validation.
It's funny you should say that. I immediately thought of a time where I was driving the car. There's a passenger beside me, and I was venting. I was hot. I was screaming about this, and I was talking about an experience I had in my childhood and how it just keeps reoccurring. And my initial reaction was her response was going to come back and say, well, don't do that. Well, you shouldn't do that. And what she hit me with, like, not literally, but figuratively, she hit me with a line that just stuck me. And she just says, I can't even imagine how hard that would be for you.
Yeah.
And I had never heard those words in my entire life. And immediately it just stuck me, and it stopped my complete fear-driven behavior. And I actually remember looking to her like this, going, wow, like, why would you say that? And she just hit me with empathy.
Yeah.
And that was the one thing in that moment. I'll give you another example. I had a former girlfriend of mine that used to come back and have a bad day. And she just say, hey, listen, when I have a bad day, I'm like, how can I be a better partner? How can I help support you in this? Like, what would that look like? And she's like, Chuck, if you could just sit with me in my emotion and just validate my experience and not make me wrong for it, and just allow me to feel that way, and just say, hey, I understand that's how you feel. Even if you had nothing else to say, you know what? I totally get that's how you feel.
Yeah.
Like,
Which
you don't have to,
validation.
Yeah. And you don't have to agree with it.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to like say what I did was right, but you can say, yeah, I see why you did that. I see that's the reason why you're feeling that way. That makes sense. Like, I could see that. And then walk me down off the ledge, because at that point there, then immediately I'm filled with, like, well, in my experience, I'm filled with, oh, wow. Okay, cool. I'm back. I can now think, rationally now. I don't feel like I'm the 8-year-old hijack that has just taken over my entire life and just shit over everything. And now, yeah, I'm back. Now I can actually have a rational conversation with you, and can you share with me what that is? And I'm just like, yeah, like now I'm there. Now I can
Yeah.
do that, whereas before I couldn't.
Yeah, because before you're in that state of fight or flight, right? Before you're in that, I need to get my point across. I need to be heard. I need to be understood. You need to recognize what it is that I'm going through. And when people are pushing back against you, it just ramps that up. But as soon as somebody, and it's got to be, one of the things that I come across, it's got to be authentic, right?
Yeah.
It can't just be, lip service just to try to get the person to become less aggressive or whatever it is, right? Because people just see straight through that. So it's got to be genuine and authentic empathy that you're bringing in, and also compassion, right? So when we talk about the steps of acceptance, when we're accepting other people or we're accepting situations or when we're accepting ourselves, we go through specific steps of accepting something, and sometimes they happen really quickly and sometimes it takes a lot of work. But on the road to acceptance, it starts with tolerance, which means you're recognizing that there's something there that you need to work on accepting, right? I'm noticing that there's something that keeps dysregulating me, so I'm tolerating it right now. What can I do about that? Then we go into empathy, compassion, forgiveness to get to acceptance.
I don't want to open up another topic because this is a completely another topic as well, but I just keep coming back to my realization of like how empathy is just the great connector.
Huge.
And devoid of empathy, what the coping mechanisms are that people usually use cognitive empathy or freeze or fake or inauthentic. But to me, when I sit inside of empathy, or someone sits with empathy with me, it is the absolute blanket that I feel comfortable in, that I can share, that I can express, that I feel safe, that somebody understands me. And then at least then I can start doing the work that I need to do to repair what I need to do or create what I want to create. But devoid of that is just a life of chaos for me.
For sure. And empathy is all about curiosity.
Now, what about devoid of empathy?
What, when people are devoid of empathy?
Yeah, in the lack of empathy. I'm not saying when people are, sorry, let me preface that. I'm not saying if they are psychopathic and they lack empathy, but in the instance where I sat in that moment with my friend riding shotgun, and she didn't hit me with empathy. Inside of that, without that tool there, what else could be created?
So, I mean, obviously we've talked about validation. That's one of the fundamental things that creates that ability to self-regulate, right? As I always say, emotion regulation starts with self-validation, but if you can't self-validate, then seek it externally. There's nothing wrong with seeking external validation. That's totally okay, particularly in the beginning of these kind of journeys. You don't want to be constantly trying to force yourself to validate internally, because if you don't know how to do that, you have to seek it external. And as people, we're set up to seek validation from people outside of ourselves. I love the work of, there's a fantastic psychiatrist called Dan Siegel, Siegel, not Siegel like the bird. He talks about how anthropology has played a massive part in this, in that it's a matter of survival for us to be accepted by other people, for us to be validated by other people, for us to be liked by other people. Because if we are, as human beings, the way we survived on the planet was by being a member of a tribe. So, if you weren't a member of that tribe, in other words, if you weren't accepted, if you weren't validated, if you weren't liked by the people that were in that tribe, then you would be set aside from that tribe, and now you wouldn't survive. So fitting in and being validated and being liked by other people innately in our system is a matter of survival. That's why it sends people into a state of fear when they're not validated, when they're not accepted, when they're not wanted, when they're not liked by the group of people that they're trying to fit in with, because fundamentally it comes down to a matter of survival.
This has been a fantastic conversation, Steve. I'm really glad that you joined us today. Just before we go, I thought we'd just give you another opportunity just to tell people where they could find you. I know that you do workshops as well that are complimentary. God bless you for doing that in this time and place of where we are as well, where they can find you. Again, just get more information for themselves. If there's parents or kids out there that are looking for a little bit more information or curious, where they can go.
Yeah, so theliberationplace.com. is my website. If you check that out, there's links to all the different groups. I facilitate 4 different groups every week that are free of charge. No need to register. They're just open format discussion meetings that I facilitate. So you can just click on the link that's on the website for those groups and attend them and join in on the conversation. Also, just send me an email, info@theliberationplace.com, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can with any questions or any resources that you're looking for.
All right. Stephen Morris, we will see you next time, but thank you very much for taking the time out today to join us to talk about our mental health initiatives that we have here on Chuck's World at Infinite Mojo. Thanks a lot for your day.
Thanks, man. Really appreciate it. Look forward to the next one.
You bet. And that's Stephen Morris, our most favorite person in the whole entire world when it comes to mental health initiatives. Feel free to go to Steve's website, theliberationplace.com. You can also find him on Instagram and also on Facebook as well at the same name as well. And now we will bring up my fabulous producer, Cam LaRock, to see what his big takeaways of today's show was.
Takeaways from this show? Man, when you guys were talking about the differences or the similarities between shame and guilt and how fear ties into that, that was just mind-boggling for me. It's something I never really thought about before, but just how just shame and guilt and the fear of shame and guilt just messes with your decision-making and just the choices you make it's I've never thought about it that way, but it's brilliant.
Yeah.
So that's something that I've been thinking about the whole show while I'm just sitting here listening to you guys. It was just that point there.
You know, I envy you in the situation that you're in when you start to first be exposed to the psychology of, healthy living and being able to understand yourself, your thoughts, your feelings, emotional regulation. In the very beginning, I was very, very incapable of all those conversations. And I had to actually hit an emotional rock bottom before I actually took that step, because I knew my way didn't work, and I just wanted to be happy, and I was tired of being tormented. So if you're out there listening and you're watching this show right now, if it's fell into your lap, however that is, I would urge you to try that as well for yourself, and give yourself a new set of tools that you can learn, because the battle or the changing of the guard of our emotional creations that we've done our entire lives is basically not your fault. It's something you've grown up with, and changing that cycle of behavior right now is possible. If you want to be able to break the habits that we've created doing all this, I think there's a fantastic new way out there. And Stephen Morris is one of those guys that I trust implicitly with that information. And I want to thank him for coming on the show today to talk to us about this. I also want to thank our title sponsor, Johnny from Holy Chuck Burgers, who is a massive mental health advocate in himself. Holy Chuck, this isn't just a great name. It's also a fantastic burger. You can see it over my shoulder over here, right there. Crazy tasty burger as well. I'll give you the meat sweats. But we want to thank Johnny for his contribution for the show as well on mental health initiatives as well. And we will have Stephen Morris back again for another episode coming up soon. And before we go, I want to say, if this conversation has driven something inside of you that you want to share, like it, or comment on, please feel free to do so. Sharing is caring. The people that you help are the ones that need the help, and people helping people, it's powerful stuff. And with that, we will see you next time on Chuck's World of Infinite Mojo.